Former TV news director Mike Rausch is back. We're talking about the latest in the saga of Uri Berliner, the editor from NPR, who has now, the official news is that he has resigned his position. This all started, I believe, last week. He wrote a very critical essay for the Free Press about NPR, talking about real problems with bias, polemic, politicization of the journalism, stuff that would not surprise anybody probably watching the show. It's a good read. I recommend reading it. We're not going to go into it in detail necessarily today, but we will talk about some of the problems that he brought up. This article was written by David Folkenflik, who is also a colleague of Berliner's at NPR. I actually think, Mike, that David has done a pretty good job covering this. I think he seems to understand what's going on, and I'm so confused about how NPR seems to be so terrible in some ways at journalism, but then they let David write this and he does a decent job. So clearly they're capable of it somehow. I don't know. Maybe when they're covering their own, but let me ask you your first big like takeaway when you found out that he finally quit after being put on an unpaid suspension a few days ago. Were you surprised that he quit his job?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think I sent you a note last week when the whole thing started that he was a dead man walking. I mean, what were his options? He could stay, or he was going to get fired, or he was going to resign. Those were the three options, so pick one.
Did you think that the fact that he was suspended without pay meant maybe he was going to escape by the skin of his teeth and he wouldn't get fired? And so thereby maybe you were surprised that he ended up quitting, because they could have fired him right away.
Yeah, he was never going to survive it. I mean, just having worked in multiple newsrooms, 12 in my career, he wasn't going to survive something like that. He became the victim of, telling the truth. And I saw a news story where there were 50 members of NPR, employees there, who were demanding that some action be taken against him. And they were claiming that many of the things that he said were not true. So in an environment like that, it's pretty tough to survive it. So I think, management at NPR, their first step was, well, how do we appease everybody here? Okay, we'll get him under the contract clause that he's not allowed to write for anybody else, and we'll suspend him for a week without pay. That was the first step. But I think eventually they would have found a reason for him to leave. They would have forced him to leave from just, psychological torture there in the workplace. That can be fairly common. And so those were, kind of the paths that were going to happen at some point. If not, the last one would have been layoffs, like Katherine Maher at CBS News, right? They didn't like what she was doing there, apparently. And so she got, her name placed on the cutback list when they had to cut expenses at CBS. And so that was the exit for her instead of firing her outright. So I think she kind of got lumped into the same concept here that he was following.
I see. Let's talk a little bit about the history behind this new CEO real fast, because he wrote, "I am resigning from NPR, a great American institution where I have worked for 25 years. I respect the integrity of my colleagues and wish for NPR to thrive and do important journalism, but I cannot work in a newsroom where I am disparaged by a new CEO whose divisive views confirm the very problems at NPR I cite in my Free Press essay." Now, for me, just stepping back from this for a second, okay, I know he must have already thought there were issues with her leadership because that's why he wrote the essay. But he didn't quit first. He wrote the essay. So the one question I guess I would ask him is, why didn't you quit before? Why did you write the essay while still employed? What do you think about his reference to her leadership, and why did he write this while still employed if eventually he was going to quit? I mean, I know we're kind of making assumptions here, but that's just one part that's a little confusing for me.
I think maybe he just didn't think through the ramifications of what he was going to say, right? I mean, he worked with all these people, he knew all these people, and he thought, hey, maybe I'll write this Otis here on what's going on here at NPR, and maybe it'll make the place better. I think, he wrote it out of frustration, but, unless you go through something like that, and he had only worked at NPR for almost his entire career. So his view of a news organization and how news organizations and corporate people react to things like this was not complete. And so I think he just kind of jumped the gun on himself. And then once the torrent of hate came his way, he realized that, oh my God, what have I done? And then it became clear, day to day, and as he thought it through, and then as they suspended him, that his time was rather limited and he couldn't work there anymore. So I think that's what happened. I think it was just, obviously he's a smart guy. He was very articulate in detailing all the issues at NPR. And, I've been a journalist for 25 years there, but didn't really see the big picture as to what happens in today's social media space. And the fact that if you do something like that, you're going to ruffle an awful lot of feathers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to ask Mike in a second about how he would have handled this, because he led very many newsrooms. And what if I work for you, Mike, and I wrote an article about how your leadership sucked and my newsroom was doing terrible journalism? How would you handle it? I mean, it's easy for us to align sympathetically with him because we agree, I think, with a lot of the points he made about the state of journalism at NPR. And then that's generally reflective, I think, of journalism in the United States right now, maybe even globally. But what if we didn't agree with him? How would you have handled that as his manager if you were in the position of the CEO? But before you answer that question, you know who needs a really good drink right now? Uri Berliner. Okay, so let's all
sure
get
does.
one for him. He can't afford it because he doesn't have a job anymore. So toast in honor of him, or send him a bottle of wine if you can figure out where he is. If you can figure out where he is, invite him to come on the show. AllisonWinePromo.com. We're starting a wine club, and it's going to be awesome. We're cycling through the wines, 6 different bottles every 3 months. I'm working on getting an interview with a guy in Argentina who's going to finally explain the extremism behind the most extremist wines in the world, my high altitude extremist wines. You're going to get all this great content. You're going to be on my listserv. We're going to drink the same wines together. We're going to commiserate about the state of extremism. If you're living in your grandma's basement, you're not an extremist, you want to be an extremist, you don't want to go to prison, great way to start. AllisonWinePromo.com. Join the wine club. It's going to be awesome. We've now gone global extremism: Italy, Spain, France, and of course, my favorite wines in Argentina. These are small batch, hand-picked grapes, small family vineyards. One's been around over 200 years. Can't get these wines anywhere else, really. So why would you want to? AllisonWinePromo.com. Okay, so Mike, let's go to my question at hand. And also, I should add, you can send me real mail. If you would like to support me through the Postal Service, you can send me some mail to my P.O. Box, 3355 Denellen, Florida, 34432. Thank you for everybody who sends support there. Letters of encouragement, pictures of your family. You want to send me some loose pocket change, winning lottery ticket, nothing creepy, nothing edible. I won't eat it because I'm going to think you're trying to poison me. What do you think about my question, Mike? How would you handle it as a manager?
Well, I think in their situation, it wasn't left to them. I mean, once you have the entire staff at NPR, or, officially 50 people, I guess, signing a letter, if that's true, demanding some retribution against him, you don't have much choice. You can't, well, here they did try to do both things, right? So they suspended him for a week to try to placate the masses, right? Because they still needed everybody to still want to work there, and they needed a happy workplace. So the workplace was thrown into turmoil. I think that was their biggest issue. Then, without acknowledging that they did anything wrong, which she did not acknowledge in her long letter to NPR, to the NPR staff, you might link to that. It's pretty interesting to see, but she couldn't acknowledge that they were liberals and leftists and, walking down one news agenda. But then in her long email that she sent to the staff, she really started to backtrack. And here's just a small part of it, where she now says that they will establish a broad-based rotating group that will meet monthly to review our coverage across all platforms in order to reflect how we're meeting our mandate, what we're catching and what we're missing, and learn from our colleagues in a climate of respectful and open-minded discussion. So what she's trying to say is, well, we never did anything wrong. We've always been middle of the road, trust us. But we're going to put together a committee, a diverse committee, and we're going to sit down and look at ourselves and make sure we're fair and balanced. Now, I imagine these monthly committees probably last 5-6 months, based on reality. I don't think they'll last very long. And it's more of something to try to placate, the public and those in the media who have been covering this story, as opposed to actually accomplishing anything. I would be shocked. The other thing you have to keep in mind about her is, she doesn't have a news background. She's never been a news person. She's been a political activist of sort on the left. So her having this job is kind of strange. She replaced John Lansing, who was a news guy. I mean, I've known John for many, many years, and John was a news guy. He started out as a news photographer. We could talk about more of John's role in this thing, because Berliner laid an awful lot of complaints against John and what had happened there, I think, over recent years. Now, one other quick aside, I was an intern at NPR many years ago in college, many years ago. But I can also tell you back then, it was a great experience. There was not a conservative in the bunch. I was in every morning meeting with staff of All Things Considered, and they were all great people, and they were all good to me, except for Susan Stamberg. She just ignored me. I was just an intern of no importance. But back in the heyday when, Bob Edwards and Susan were the main hosts of All Things Considered, which was kind of the flagship program for NPR. So
you definitely have to hire different people. But remember, the New York Times tried to do that, and then they just fired the people they hired. Remember, that was
right.
So
everybody else revolted against the new people with different ideas. You weren't in that structure, that organization. You were not allowed to have a different idea. And the vocal, we know everybody, those on the left tend to be incredibly vocal. I have experienced it myself.
Right.
So, what do you do? If you can only change it if you're given the amount of time to do it, and it would take years to change it. Years to change it. And it would be challenging and a struggle beyond your imagination to change an organization so embedded and inbred in the liberal mindset like NPR is. Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question from locals in a second. alsamaro.locals.com for ways to support my work. $5 a month. Go one-on-one with the most censored people on the internet.